The excavators almost missed it. 12 meters beneath the construction site along the Via Flaminia, 14 kilometers north of the Roman Colosseum, a backhoe operator named Giuseppe Ferrante felt his machine strike something that wasn't soil. The time was 9:2003 a.m. on September 17th, 2008. The temperature, 21 degrees Celsius.
Look at
the
this
discovery,
detail emerging.
a marble
Incredible, the inscription
sarcophagus,
is clearing.
so massive it required 3 days to extract. When archaeologists finally brushed away 2 millennia of sediment and read the inscription carved into that ancient stone, they realized they had found something impossible. They had found the grave of a ghost. The Latin was formal, military, unmistakable. Marcus Nonius Macrinus, consul, governor of Pannonia, comes Augustorum, intimate friend of the divine emperor, Marcus Aurelius, comes Augustorum, companion of the emperors, a title reserved for fewer than a dozen men in any generation, the highest military honor the Roman Empire could bestow. Here lay a general who commanded Rome's deadliest legions, a man who walked beside philosopher emperors and crushed barbarian kings, a warrior aristocrat whose career spanned 4 decades of warfare across 3 continents, and his story had been almost entirely forgotten. Within months of the discovery, historians began reconstructing a biography that read like fiction. They found a man whose life paralleled the Hollywood legend of Maximus Decimus Meridius with such precision that it could not be coincidence. Ridley Scott's screenwriters, David Franzoni and John Logan, had based their hero on scattered references to this very man, then believed he was too obscure to ever be verified. The tomb changed everything. But here is what the filmmakers got wrong. Maximus, the fiction, is a story of personal vengeance, a man who fights to avenge his murdered family. It is emotionally satisfying. It is cinematically perfect. It is also a lie. The real story is not about one man's grief. It is about one man's burden, the impossible weight of holding civilization together when everything conspires to tear it apart. Marcus Nonius Macrinus did not fight for revenge. He fought to prevent an apocalypse. To understand the man, you must first understand the catastrophe. The year is 166 AD. The Roman Empire stretches across 5 million square kilometers, encompassing 70 million souls. From the rain-soaked walls of Hadrian's Barrier in Britannia to the sun-scorched garrison towns along the Euphrates, Rome appears unassailable. Its legions have not lost a major war in living memory. Its engineers have constructed 400,000 kilometers of roads. Its laws govern a quarter of humanity. It is the greatest concentration of power, wealth, and stability the Western world has ever known. And it is about to collapse. The first sign arrives in February of 166 AD, carried in the bodies of soldiers returning from a victorious campaign against Parthia. The legions had sacked the city of Seleucia, deep in Mesopotamian territory. They returned bearing gold, slaves, and something far more deadly, a pathogen modern epidemiologists believe was either smallpox or measles, encountering a population with zero immunity. The Antonine Plague, named for the ruling dynasty, killed between 5 and 10 million people over the following 15 years. At its peak, 2,000 Romans died every day in the capital alone. The physician Galen, who witnessed the outbreak firsthand, described patients drowning in fluid from their own lungs, their skin erupting in pustules that turned black before death. Entire legions were reduced to half strength. Tax revenues collapsed as farmers abandoned their fields. The silver content of Roman currency was debased by 25%, triggering inflation that destroyed savings across the empire. Then came the barbarians. The Germanic tribes beyond the Danube had raided Roman territory for centuries, but they had always been divided. Marcomanni against Quadi, Sarmatians against both, a constellation of feuding clans that Rome expertly manipulated. In 167 AD, something changed. A confederation emerged. Modern historians debate whether it was coordinated strategy or simply opportunistic alliance, but the result was unprecedented. The Marcomanni, Quadi, Sarmatians, Iazyges, and at least 8 smaller tribes united under a loose coalition. Their combined strength, an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 warriors. They had watched the plague devastate Roman defenses. They had seen garrison after garrison fall below operational strength. They had counted the funeral pyres burning along the frontier. And in the winter of 167 to 168 AD, they crossed. The Danube froze solid enough to support cavalry that January, a rare meteorological event that the tribes interpreted as divine sanction. On the night of January 6th, 168 AD, approximately 12,000 warriors crossed the ice near the fortress of Carnuntum. Within 3 days, 3 auxiliary forts had been overrun. Within 3 weeks, the invaders had penetrated 200 kilometers into Roman territory. The governor of Pannonia Superior sent a dispatch to Rome that arrived on February 3rd, 168 AD. Its language was unusually blunt for official correspondence. The frontier is broken. Send reinforcements or abandon the province. For the first time since Hannibal crossed the Alps 380 years earlier, a barbarian army stood on Italian soil. Panic gripped Rome. The Senate debated evacuation procedures. Wealthy families began relocating assets to Sicily and North Africa. Recruiting standards were lowered so dramatically that slaves and gladiators were offered freedom in exchange for military service. And on his throne in the Palatine Palace, the philosopher, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, faced an impossible choice. Marcus Aurelius remains the only Roman emperor whose personal writings survived intact. His Meditations, a private journal never intended for publication, reveals a man profoundly uncomfortable with warfare. He wrote of seeking tranquility, accepting fate, recognizing the essential equality of all human souls. He was temperamentally unsuited to lead armies, but he was also brutally honest with himself. And in February of 168 AD, writing by lamplight in his study at 2:14 a.m., according to one contemporary account, he wrote a passage that scholars believe captures his decision. What stands in the way becomes the way. The impediment to action advances action. The philosopher would become a warlord, but he would not fight alone. On February 18th, 168 AD, Marcus Aurelius summoned Marcus Nonius Macrinus to the Palatine Palace. The man who entered that chamber was not the Hispanic farmer of Hollywood legend. He was the scion of one of Italy's wealthiest families, born in Brixia, modern-day Brescia, around 110 AD. His father had been a senator. His grandfather had commanded legions under Trajan. He had been raised in the absolute expectation that he would rule. But Macrinus was not merely privileged. He was exceptional. His career, reconstructed from inscriptions and official records, reveals a methodical ascent through every significant position in Roman government. Quaestor at 25. Managing imperial finances in Asia Minor. Praetor at 30. Dispensing justice in Rome itself. Governor of Pannonia Inferior at 42. Learning the frontier that would later define his legacy. Consul at 51. The highest regular office in the empire. More significantly, he had survived. Roman politics in the 2nd century was lethal. Of the 16 men who served as consul between 150 and 165 AD, 11 died violently, executed, assassinated, or killed in civil conflicts. Macrinus had navigated those waters without a single recorded enemy. His genius was not the sword. It was the strategist's understanding that every battle is won or lost before the first blade is drawn. Marcus Aurelius knew this. He had watched Macrinus operate for 3 decades, and now, facing existential crisis, he needed a weapon that thought rather than merely fought. The conversation that February night lasted until dawn. No transcript survives, but the outcome does. Macrinus was appointed comes Augustorum, companion of the emperors, with supreme command of all forces on the Danube frontier. The emperor had chosen his champion. Macrinus arrived at the frontier headquarters of Carnuntum on March 14th, 168 AD. The temperature was 4 degrees Celsius. A light snow was falling. What he found was not an army. It a collection of survivors. The 3 legions stationed along the upper Danube, the 14 Gemina, the I Adutrix, and the X Gemina, had been reduced from a combined strength of 18,000 to approximately 11,000 effectives. The plague had killed thousands. Desertion had claimed thousands more. The survivors were demoralized, underfed, and convinced they were fighting a losing war. Military psychologists have a term for what Macrinus faced: unit cohesion collapse. When casualties exceed 40% in a short period, the social bonds that make men fight for each other, rather than simply fighting to survive, disintegrate. Soldiers stop seeing themselves as part of a unit and begin seeing themselves as individuals awaiting death. Macrinus understood this phenomenon 17 centuries before it was formally described. His first act was not military, it was administrative. He ordered a complete audit of supply chains, discovering that approximately 30% of allocated rations were being embezzled by corrupt logistics officers. Within 3 days, he had executed 2 tribunes and 14 centurions for theft. The executions were conducted at 6 a.m. on March 18th, in front of the assembled garrison. Macrinus delivered no grand speech. He simply stood beside the bodies and said, according to the historian Cassius Dio, "The standards you carry are not decorations. The oath you swore was not theatre. Anyone who treats this army as his personal treasury is an enemy of Rome and will die as one." The message was received. Within 2 weeks, hot meals were arriving regularly. Medical supplies were restocked. Replacement equipment flowed from depots that had previously claimed shortages. The physical restoration of the army was underway, but bodies heal faster than souls. Macrinus spent the next month on a program that modern military leaders would recognize as morale reconstruction. He ate with common soldiers. He walked patrol routes in person. He memorized names, asked about families, visited the sick. He made himself visible, present, human. Then he gave them something to hate. Macrinus understood a fundamental truth about warfare. Soldiers do not fight abstractions. They do not die for concepts like civilization or empire. They fight for things they can see, touch, feel. They fight for the man beside them, the home behind them, the enemy in front of them. He arranged for captured barbarian equipment to be displayed throughout the camp. The axes that had split Roman shields, the spears that had killed Roman soldiers. He commissioned artists to paint scenes of barbarian atrocities on panels displayed near the mess halls. He was manufacturing rage, but not blind rage, controlled rage. Rage that would burn hot enough to drive men forward, but not so hot that it destroyed discipline. The Roman legion's greatest advantage was its systematic, machine-like coordination. Macrinus needed men who hated enough to fight, but not enough to break formation. By May of 168 AD, he had his army. The first test came at Fortress Brigetio, a critical crossing point on the Danube, now besieged by approximately 8,000 Marcomanni warriors under a chieftain named Balamar's nephew, whose name survives only as Adalges. The conventional response would be a relief column, marching directly to break the siege. Macrinus rejected this approach. Instead, he divided his forces into 3 columns. The first, commanded by Legate Gaius Aufidius Victorinus, would approach from the west with 4,000 men, making noise, showing standards, advertising their presence. The second, under Tribune Marcus Claudius Fronto, would circle north with 2,000 cavalry, remaining invisible until the decisive moment. Macrinus himself led the third column. 3,000 legionaries taking an impossible route through marshland that the barbarians believed impassable. The march began at 4:30 a.m. on June 12th, 168 AD. Macrinus's column moved for 36 consecutive hours, covering 72 kilometers through terrain that sucked at their boots and concealed their movement. At 4:47 p.m. on June 13th, they struck. The barbarians, focused entirely on Victorinus's approaching column, never saw the attack coming. Macrinus hit their supply camp first, setting fire to provisions that represented months of accumulated stores. The flames rose 30 meters into the darkening sky, a signal to Fronto's cavalry waiting in the northern hills. The hammer fell from 3 directions simultaneously. Within 90 minutes, Adalges's force was destroyed. Roman sources claim 6,000 barbarian dead against fewer than 400 Roman casualties. Even accounting for propaganda inflation, the ratio demonstrates the devastating effectiveness of Macrinus's coordination. He had not simply won. He had demonstrated that Roman tactical superiority remained intact, despite everything the plague had taken. The message traveled fast to the frontier legions who regained their confidence, and to the barbarian confederation that now understood their opponent. What followed was not a single glorious battle, but 7 years of grinding, methodical warfare. Macrinus understood that the barbarian coalition could not be destroyed in one stroke. Its strength was distributed across hundreds of kilometers of frontier. Its warriors could disperse into forests where legions could not follow. He adopted a strategy of systematic attrition, named for the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus, who defeated Hannibal by refusing decisive engagement. Fabian warfare prioritizes exhaustion over confrontation. Macrinus harried supply lines. He fortified river crossings. He launched winter raids that destroyed stored grain. He waited. The barbarians needed to win quickly. Their coalition was fragile, held together by the promise of Roman plunder. Every month, without major victories, weakened Balamar's authority. Every failed raid drained resources that could not be replaced. By 175 AD, the Confederation had fractured. Balamar was dead, killed by rivals within his own alliance. The Marcomanni sued for peace. The Quadi accepted client kingdom status. The frontier was restored. Marcus Nonius Macrinus had saved the empire. Then he vanished from the record. No triumphal arch bears his name. No ancient biography survives. The historians who chronicled the Marcomannic Wars, Cassius Dio, Herodian, the anonymous authors of the Historia Augusta, mention him only in passing, if at all. Why? The answer lies in what came after Marcus Aurelius. When the philosopher emperor died in 180 AD, his son Commodus inherited the throne. Unlike his father, Commodus had no interest in governance. He was obsessed with gladiatorial combat, performing in the arena himself, scandalizing the aristocracy. He was paranoid. Commodus purged anyone associated with his father's inner circle, anyone who might compare him unfavorably to Marcus Aurelius, anyone who might represent the old order of competence and duty. The historical record does not confirm Macrinus's fate, but the pattern suggests either execution or forced retirement into obscurity. His accomplishments were too closely tied to the previous reign. Remembering him meant criticizing the new emperor. So Rome forgot. Until September 2008, when a backhoe struck marble. Hollywood gave us a gladiator, fighting for his murdered family. It is a satisfying narrative. Revenge is simple. Revenge is personal. Revenge fills 2 hours perfectly. But the real Maximus was not driven by grief. He was driven by something more difficult to dramatize: responsibility. Marcus Nonius Macrinus spent 7 years away from his family, enduring conditions that would break most men, fighting a war that offered no glory, only the grinding necessity of keeping civilization intact. He did not seek revenge against an emperor. He served one. His tomb, when fully excavated, revealed a man who died wealthy, honored, and apparently at peace. The inscriptions speak of a life completed rather than a life cut short. Whatever Commodus did to erase his legacy, he could not touch the man himself. In the end, Marcus Nonius Macrinus did not need revenge. He had something better, a world that still existed because of what he had done. The gladiator who actually existed was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who came after. including us.